Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. Nelson and Bisola's love story was one for the ages, a tale of two hearts brought together against all odds. They met during their university days, where Nelson, a reserved and ambitious young man, found himself smitten by Bisola's vibrant personality. Bisola, on her part, was captivated by Nelson's calm demeanor and sharp intellect. They married a few years after graduation, building a beautiful life filled with shared dreams and unwavering support. Their happiness, however, was put to the test when Pauline, Nelson's mother, moved in with them. Pauline had always been a strong-willed woman, fiercely protective of her only son. Though she claimed to have accepted Bisola as part of the family, her subtle jabs and disapproving looks told a different story. To Pauline, no woman could ever be good enough for Nelson. At first, Bisola tried to win Pauline over with kindness. She cooked Pauline's favorite meals, invited her to join their outings, and even rearranged her busy schedule to accommodate Pauline's needs. Yet nothing she did seemed to soften Pauline's stance. "She's too independent," Pauline often muttered to herself. "Women like her don't respect tradition." Pauline's disdain reached its peak one afternoon when she returned from the market with a sinister glint in her eye. "Nelson," she began, feigning hesitance, "I need to tell you something about Bisola." Nelson, who was typing away on his laptop, barely looked up. "What is it, Mum?" he asked, distracted. Pauline took a seat, wringing her hands for effect. "I saw her today. She was at a cafe with another man." That caught Nelson's attention. He turned to her, his brows furrowing. "What do you mean?" She was laughing, leaning into him. "They looked too comfortable to be just friends," Pauline continued, her voice dripping with concern. "I didn't want to believe it, but my instincts are rarely wrong. You need to watch her, son. Don't let her make a fool of you." Nelson's initial reaction was disbelief. Bisola cheating. It didn't align with the woman he knew and loved. Still, Pauline's words lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the unease even as he dismissed her story aloud. Pauline, satisfied with planting the first seed of doubt, decided to bide her time. She knew Nelson's trust in Bisola wouldn't crumble overnight, but she was patient. After all, she had waited years to remove Bisola from her son's life. Little did Nelson realize the storm brewing in his home would soon threaten to destroy everything he held dear. Pauline's words clung to Nelson's mind like a stubborn shadow, lingering in every quiet moment he had to himself. Though he wanted to believe in Bisola's innocence, the seed of doubt his mother had planted was beginning to take root. He found himself replaying Pauline's words, wondering if there might be any truth to them. Bisola, oblivious to the growing tension in her home, continued to go about her daily routine. She remained cheerful, often sharing updates about her day with Nelson during dinner. Yet Nelson, usually an attentive listener, now found himself distracted. His responses were shorter, his gaze more distant, and his tone less affectionate. It wasn't long before Bisola noticed the change. "Are you okay, love?" she asked one evening as they sat on the couch, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Nelson nodded, forcing a small smile. "Just tired," he replied, his voice unconvincing. Bisola tilted her head, concerned, but chose not to push further. Meanwhile, Pauline began intensifying her subtle attacks. She would accidentally walk into the room while Bisola was on the phone and later suggest to Nelson that her calls were suspicious. "Who does she talk to so much? A married woman should prioritize her husband, not whoever she's always chatting with," Pauline remarked one evening. Nelson shrugged it off, but her words festered in his mind. Pauline didn't stop there. On another occasion, Bisola came home late from work due to a meeting running over time. Nelson had been waiting with Pauline, who used the opportunity to stoke his growing mistrust. "What kind of wife doesn't call to let her husband know she'll be late?" "She's taking advantage of your kindness, Nelson," Pauline said, shaking her head disapprovingly. When Bisola walked in visibly tired, Nelson's greeting was cold. "Couldn't you at least call to let me know you'd be late?" he asked. Bisola blinked, startled by the tone of his voice. "I'm sorry, I was caught up in the meeting and didn't realize the time." "It won't happen again," she said softly, but Nelson's silence lingered. Bisola couldn't help but feel the growing distance between them. Nelson's trust, once unshakable, now seemed brittle. He began scrutinizing her actions, questioning her about small things like why she had changed her usual schedule or why she needed to meet certain friends. Pauline observed these cracks with satisfaction, knowing it was only a matter of time before her son fully turned against Bisola. She wasn't just driving a wedge between them, she was building a wall brick by brick. And Nelson, blinded by his mother's manipulations, couldn't see the damage being done. The love he once held for Bisola was slowly being eclipsed by suspicion and doubt. The tension in the house was becoming unbearable for Bisola. Nelson's mood swings and cold stares had become more frequent, and she felt as though she were walking on eggshells around him. She tried to brush it off as stress, hoping things would return to normal, but she couldn't ignore the creeping feeling that something had changed. Unbeknownst to her, Pauline was preparing to deliver the final blow. For weeks she had been working on her most damaging ploy yet, evidence. One evening she entered the living room holding an envelope and wearing an expression of feigned heartbreak. "Nelson," she began solemnly, "I didn't want to do this, but I can't keep quiet any longer. You deserve to know the truth." Nelson looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about, Mum?" Pauline handed him the envelope. Inside were several photographs of Bisola sitting at a restaurant with a man. The two appeared to be laughing and talking, and in one image the man's hand rested briefly on Bisola's arm. "I followed her to this cafe," Pauline lied, her voice trembling. "This is who she's been sneaking off to see." "How could she do this to you?" Nelson's heart dropped as he stared at the photos. His mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief. He couldn't reconcile the woman in the photos with the Bisola he thought he knew. When Bisola returned home later that evening, she was met with an icy silence. She could tell something was wrong the moment she stepped through the door. Nelson sat in the living room, the photographs spread out on the table in front of him. Pauline was by his side, her arms crossed as though preparing for battle. "What's going on?" Bisola asked, her voice filled with concern. Nelson stood, his face a mask of anger. "Who is he, Bisola? How long has this been going on?" he demanded, his voice loud and accusing. Bisola's eyes widened as she saw the photos. "What, Nelson, this is Aid. He's an old friend from university. We ran into each other by chance and he invited me for coffee. There's nothing going on between us." Pauline scoffed. "Do you expect us to believe that? Look at these pictures. The way you're leaning into him, laughing. You're clearly more than just friends." Tears welled up in Bisola's eyes. "Nelson, you know me. You know I'd never betray you. Please don't let this come between us." But Nelson's anger drowned out her words. "Pack your things, Bisola. I can't do this anymore," he said coldly. Bisola froze, her heart shattering. "Nelson, please, leave," he said, his voice final. With tears streaming down her face, Bisola packed a small suitcase and walked out of the home she had built with the man she loved. Pauline watched her leave, satisfaction glinting in her eyes. The night Bisola left was one she would never forget. The sky was dark and rain poured relentlessly as if mourning her shattered heart. She stood outside the house she had once called home, clutching a small suitcase. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, she felt utterly abandoned. Her tears mixed with the rain as she glanced one last time at the house, hoping Nelson would rush out and stop her. But the door remained closed and the lights inside dimmed. As Bisola walked away, each step felt heavier than the last. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, trying to make sense of it all. How could Nelson, the man who once loved her so fiercely, turn against her so easily? The pain of his betrayal burned deep, but what hurt the most was the realization that he had chosen to believe his mother over her. Bisola found refuge with her childhood friend, Adaora, who lived in a neighboring city. Adaora was shocked to see her in such a state and immediately welcomed her into her home. Over cups of tea and amidst the comforting warmth of Adaora's small apartment, Bisola recounted the events that had led to her being cast out. Adaora listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. "This doesn't make any sense," Adaora said, shaking her head. "Why would Nelson believe such lies? And why would his mother go to such lengths to ruin your marriage? I don't know, Bisola replied, her voice breaking. I thought she was warming up to me, but I guess I was wrong. She never liked me, and now she's finally succeeded in getting rid of me. Adaora took Bisola's hand and squeezed it reassuringly. You're stronger than this, Bisola. You don't need them. You'll rebuild your life, and when the truth comes out, Nelson will regret the day he let you go. Over the following weeks, Bisola began piecing her life back together. She found a job at a local marketing firm and rented a small but cozy apartment. Though she tried to focus on her new life, the pain of Nelson's betrayal lingered like a shadow. Unbeknownst to Nelson, Bisola was carrying his child. She had discovered she was pregnant a few days before the accusations erupted. At first she had planned to share the joyous news with him, but the opportunity never came. Now she was determined to raise her child on her own. Meanwhile, back at the house, Nelson was battling his own demons. The once warm and loving home now felt cold and empty. Though Pauline continued to act as if she had done the right thing, Nelson couldn't shake the hollow feeling in his chest. He told himself he had made the right decision, that Bisola had betrayed him, but deep down he felt the pangs of regret. The days turned into weeks and life moved on, but for Bisola and Nelson the wounds of that night would remain open. Little did they know the truth that would unravel their lives even further was just beginning to surface. Bisola sat on the edge of her small bed, gently caressing her growing belly. It had been 3 months since she had been thrown out of her home, and each day brought new challenges. Yet, despite the betrayal and heartbreak, she found solace in the life growing within her. Her child had become her anchor, the light piercing through the darkness of her sorrow. Adaora, ever supportive, had helped Bisola settle into her new life. With Adaora's encouragement, she had secured a position at a local marketing firm, where her skills and professionalism quickly earned her respect. Though her colleagues were warm and welcoming, Bisola kept her personal life private, unwilling to share the pain she carried. "I'm so proud of you," Adaora said one evening as they sat together in the living room of Bisola's modest apartment. "You've handled all of this with so much strength." "Nelson doesn't deserve you," Bisola sighed, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "It's not just about me anymore. I have to be strong for this little one. I don't want my child to grow up in a house where love is conditional." Adaora placed a comforting hand on Bisola's shoulder. "You'll give your child all the love they need, and when the time comes, the truth will reveal itself." Meanwhile, Nelson's life was far from the peace he had hoped for when he sent Bisola away. The once vibrant home now felt eerily quiet. Pauline, who had taken over the household, reveled in her perceived victory. She busied herself with cooking, cleaning, and ensuring Nelson was well taken care of, but her overbearing presence quickly began to weigh on him. Nelson found himself replaying the events leading to Bisola's departure. He wanted to convince himself that he had made the right decision, but doubt gnawed at him. Her tears, her desperate pleas for him to trust her, haunted him in the dead of night. One evening, Nelson returned from work to find his father, Felix, standing at the doorstep. The estranged man had left Pauline and Nelson years ago, but his presence now was both unexpected and unsettling. "What are you doing here?" Nelson asked coldly. "I need to talk to you," Felix replied, his tone serious. "It's about your mother." Reluctantly, Nelson let him in. Over coffee, Felix began recounting stories from their past, stories that painted Pauline in a much different light. "Your mother has a history of manipulating situations to suit her needs," Felix confessed. "She did it to me, and I suspect she's done it again with Bisola." The revelation struck Nelson like a bolt of lightning. Could his mother have lied about Bisola's supposed affair? The thought was too painful to bear, but a seed of doubt about Pauline's motives was now firmly planted. Nelson sat frozen, his cup of coffee untouched. His father's words echoed in his mind, tearing through the foundation of everything he believed. "What do you mean she manipulated you?" "What exactly are you saying?" Nelson asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and frustration. Felix sighed deeply, as though the weight of years of secrets rested on his shoulders. "Your mother has always been possessive. When we were married, she wanted everything done her way. If she felt anyone or anything threatened her control, she would do whatever it took to eliminate that threat. I stayed silent for too long, hoping things would change, but her lies and schemes eventually drove me away. Nelson shook his head, struggling to process the information. That doesn't mean she'd lie about Bisola. She was just protecting me, wasn't she? Felix leaned forward, his gaze steady. Think about it, son. Has she ever truly supported anyone in your life other than herself? Look at the pattern. You're a grown man, but she still tries to control you, to keep you close. She doesn't want to lose you, even if it means destroying what makes you happy. The words hit Nelson harder than he expected. He had always viewed his mother as a strong, loving woman who had endured hardships to raise him. But now cracks were forming in that image. He thought back to the accusations against Bisola, the photographs Pauline presented, and the way she had fanned the flames of doubt. Why would she go that far? Bisola didn't deserve that, Nelson muttered, his voice laced with regret. Felix placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Your mother sees Bisola as competition, not family. She didn't like sharing your attention, and she's willing to lie to get her way. I'm telling you this now because I regret staying silent when she did the same to me. Don't let her ruin your life the way she ruined ours. Nelson sat in silence long after Felix left. The idea that his mother could have fabricated the entire story was unbearable, yet the pieces began to fit. Pauline's disdain for Bisola, her eagerness to point out perceived flaws, and the conveniently timed photographs, all of it seemed too calculated. Determined to uncover the truth, Nelson decided to act. He hired a private investigator to verify Pauline's claims, desperate to know if the accusations against Bisola had been lies. As the days passed, the weight of his decision to send Bisola away grew heavier. For the first time, Nelson began to question everything, not just his mother's actions, but his own. Had he been too quick to judge, too blind to see the manipulation at play? If Bisola had been innocent all along, how could he ever face her again? As he waited for the investigator's report, Nelson found himself unable to sleep, haunted by memories of Bisola's tear-streaked face as she begged him to believe her. The love they had shared, once so strong and pure, now felt like a distant memory overshadowed by his guilt. Little did he know the truth he sought would not only change his life, but also bring him face to face with a past he could never have imagined. The days stretched into weeks as Nelson waited for the private investigator's findings. Each passing moment was torturous, filled with memories of Bisola's laughter, her warmth, and the way she had loved him without reserve. His guilt deepened with every recollection of her tearful pleas, and the silence of his now empty home amplified the void she had left behind. Pauline, unaware of the investigation, continued to maintain her air of victory. She busied herself preparing Nelson's meals and reminding him that she had only acted in his best interests. "You'll see, my son," she often said. "In time, you'll find a woman who truly values you." But her words rang hollow in Nelson's ears. Finally, the call came. The investigator's voice was calm yet firm as he delivered his findings. "Mr. Nelson, I've reviewed the photographs and tracked the man in question. His name is Aid, an old classmate of your wife's. They met for coffee that day to catch up, nothing more. I also found the cafe staff who confirmed that their interaction was friendly and brief. There's no evidence of infidelity." Nelson's chest tightened as he listened. The investigator continued, "I also checked the origin of the photos your mother provided. They were edited, doctored to make the interaction appear more intimate than it was. Whoever created these went to great lengths to make it look incriminating." Nelson's heart sank. The truth was undeniable. Bisola had been innocent all along. The accusations, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it had all been a lie, meticulously crafted by his own mother. He clenched his fists, anger and shame coursing through him. How could he have been so blind? That evening, Nelson confronted Pauline. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself when he walked in, holding the investigator's report. "Mum, we need to talk," he said, his voice cold. Pauline looked up, startled by his tone. "What is it, son?" "I know the truth," Nelson said, slamming the report onto the counter. "The photos, the accusations, it was all a lie. Bisola didn't cheat on me." "You made it all up," Pauline's face paled. "Nelson, I only did what was best for you." That woman wasn't right for you. Stop! Nelson roared, his voice shaking with fury. You destroyed my marriage, Mum. You ruined the best thing that ever happened to me because you couldn't let me have my own life. How could you do this to me? Pauline stammered, her composure unraveling. I didn't want to lose you. She was taking you away from me, and You've already lost me, Nelson interrupted, his eyes burning with tears. I can't live under the same roof as someone who would destroy my happiness out of selfishness. Pauline reached out to him, but he stepped back. You need to leave, he said, his voice cold and final. As Pauline packed her belongings, Nelson's thoughts turned to Bisola. He knew he had wronged her in the worst possible way, and he wasn't sure she would ever forgive him. But one thing was clear, he needed to find her and make things right, no matter the cost. With a heavy heart, Nelson began his search, determined to face the woman he had betrayed and confess the truth. Nelson stood by the window of his now empty home, staring into the darkness outside. The weight of his actions bore down on him, heavier than ever. Pauline was gone, her manipulative web unraveled, but her absence brought no solace. The silence of the house served as a constant reminder of his mistake. Bisola was gone, and it was his fault. Determined to make amends, Nelson began his search for Bisola. He knew it wouldn't be easy. She had severed all contact after he sent her away. He tried calling her old number, but it was no longer in service. He reached out to mutual friends, but none had seen or heard from her since she left. Each dead end only deepened his guilt. One evening, Nelson decided to visit Bisola's parents, hoping they might know where she was. He hadn't seen them since the wedding, and as he approached their modest home, he was filled with a mixture of shame and apprehension. Bisola's father, Chief Oladimeji, opened the door. His expression hardened when he saw Nelson. What do you want? He asked coldly. I need to find Bisola, Nelson said, his voice heavy with regret. I need to apologize for everything I've done. Chief Oladimeji stepped aside, allowing Nelson into the living room. Bisola's mother, seated on the couch, looked up with an expression that mirrored her husband's. You have a lot of nerve coming here after what you did, she said, her voice sharp. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Nelson began, his voice trembling. But I've learned the truth. My mother lied about Bisola. She was never unfaithful. I made a terrible mistake, and I need to make it right. The room fell silent. Finally, Chief Oladimeji spoke. Bisola didn't tell us much when she left. She only said that her marriage was over. We haven't seen her since. Nelson's heart sank. Please, he pleaded. If you hear from her, let her know I'm looking for her. The Oladimejis said nothing, their silence a painful reminder of the damage Nelson had caused. As he left their home, he felt more lost than ever. Where could she be? Weeks turned into months, and Nelson's search continued. He hired another investigator to track Bisola's whereabouts. It wasn't until one day, nearly 6 months after Pauline's confession, that he received a lead. The investigator had found Bisola in another city, living in a small apartment. She had a new job and was raising a child, a boy. The revelation shocked Nelson to his core. A child? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The investigator confirmed that the boy was around 2 years old, and there was no record of her being with anyone else since leaving Nelson. Realization dawned. The child had to be his. Overwhelmed with emotion, Nelson set out for the city, his mind racing. He wasn't just seeking forgiveness anymore. He was seeking his family. Nelson arrived in the bustling city where Bisola now lived. The investigator had provided an address, but as Nelson stood outside the modest apartment building, his hands trembled. He hadn't seen Bisola in nearly 3 years, and the knowledge that she was raising a child, his child, filled him with a mix of hope and dread. Would she even want to see him? Could she ever forgive him? Gathering his courage, he climbed the narrow staircase to her apartment. He reached the door, hesitating for a moment before knocking softly. The door creaked open, and there she was. Bisola stood before him, looking as radiant as ever, though there was a guarded expression in her eyes. In her arms was a little boy with the same deep brown eyes Nelson saw every morning in the mirror. Nelson, Bisola stammered, her surprise evident. She instinctively stepped back, shielding the child. What are you doing here? For a moment, Nelson was speechless. His gaze shifted between Bisola and the boy. Bisola, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I know I have no right to be here, but I had to see you. I had to apologize for everything. Bisola's eyes narrowed, her stance firm. You think an apology can undo what you did? You threw me out of our home. You called me a liar. You let your mother destroy us. I know, Nelson said, his voice breaking. I was wrong. I believed the lies she told because I was weak, and I've lived with that regret every single day since you left. Bisola remained silent, her expression unreadable. The little boy squirmed in her arms, his innocent gaze fixed on Nelson. Is he? Nelson asked hesitantly, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Bisola replied, her tone clipped. This is Ayo. He's your son. Hearing the confirmation, Nelson's knees nearly buckled. He knelt to the boy's eye level, his heart swelling as Ayo stared back at him curiously. Hi, Ayo, Nelson said softly, tears streaming down his face. I'm your daddy. Ayo tilted his head, studying Nelson for a moment before offering a shy smile. Nelson's heart ached. He had missed so much, his son's first steps, his first words, every precious moment Bisola had experienced alone. Bisola stepped back, her voice cold. Don't think you can just walk back into our lives because you feel guilty now. Ayo and I have built a life without you. Bisola, please, Nelson pleaded. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need a chance to make things right. I want to be there for you and for Ayo. Bisola's resolve wavered for a moment as she saw the sincerity in Nelson's eyes, but the pain of his betrayal was still fresh in her heart. You don't get to decide that, she said firmly. You destroyed us, and you'll have to prove that you've changed. I will, Nelson vowed. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll fight for you, for Ayo, for our family. Bisola said nothing, closing the door gently but firmly. As Nelson stood in the hallway, he realized the road to redemption would not be easy, but he was determined to walk it. Nelson spent the following weeks in the city, determined to rebuild the bridges he had burned. He found a small apartment nearby, hoping to show Bisola he was serious about being part of her and Ayo's life. Every day he wrestled with the weight of his past mistakes, but he knew he couldn't let his guilt paralyze him. If there was even a sliver of hope to win Bisola's trust again, he would give it his all. Bisola, however, remained guarded. Though she allowed him to visit Ayo occasionally, she kept their interactions brief. She was wary of letting him get too close, afraid that he might hurt her again. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, she couldn't ignore the changes in Nelson. He was more attentive, more present, and visibly remorseful. One afternoon, Nelson arrived at Bisola's apartment with a small toy truck for Ayo. The boy's face lit up with joy as he ran into Nelson's arms. Watching them together stirred conflicting emotions in Bisola. On one hand, she wanted to protect her son from potential heartbreak, but on the other, she couldn't deny that Ayo deserved to know his father. Why are you really here, Nelson? Bisola asked one evening after Ayo had gone to bed. Is this just about easing your guilt? Nelson looked her in the eye, his expression earnest. I won't deny that I feel guilty, Bisola, but this isn't about me. It's about you and Ayo. I've realized how much I lost when I let you go. I was a fool to believe those lies, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. Bisola crossed her arms, her voice laced with pain. Do you have any idea what you put me through? I was pregnant, Nelson. I was carrying your child when you threw me out. I begged you to trust me, and you turned your back on me. I had to rebuild my life from scratch, alone. Tears welled up in Nelson's eyes. I can never undo the pain I caused you. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. I want to be the father Ayo deserves and the partner I should have been from the start. Please, give me a chance to prove that I've changed. Bisola remained silent, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to believe him, to hope that he could truly be the man she once loved. But trust was not easily rebuilt, and she needed time. Over the following months, Nelson continued to show his commitment. He took on a more active role in Ayo's life, attending his preschool events, taking him to the park, and bonding with him over shared laughter and stories. Ayo's affection for his father grew, and Bisola couldn't ignore the joy it brought her to see them together. One evening, as they sat together watching Ayo play, Bisola finally spoke. You've made progress, Nelson, but trust isn't something you can rush. It's earned little by little. Nelson nodded, his heart filled with hope. I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight, Bisola. I'm asking for the chance to keep earning it every single day. In the months that followed, Bisola and Nelson began to rebuild their relationship. It was slow and filled with challenges, but they both remained committed to the process. For Ayo's sake and for their own, they decided to take things one step at a time. In the end, love proved stronger than betrayal. Though scars remained, they learned that with patience, humility, and effort, even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.